Welcome to episode 124 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on November 22nd, 2024. Today, I am honored to bring you an interview with a wonderful person named Helen Robertson. She is a knitting artist and a teacher. There's a lot to come, so let's dive in. Hello. It has been longer than I expected before I could get this episode out to you, and I do apologize for that. I did have a rather large assignment that I needed to get done, but in all honesty, I also found myself juggling some anxiety and imposter syndrome as I tried to get that assignment done, which made it all the more time-consuming. But hey-ho, it's in. I'm happy with it. We're moving on with life. Before we move into the interview with Helen, I have two things I want to talk about at the top of the show this week. First, I am at the start of the second assignment of the semester, and it will involve some light primary research that I need to get done fairly quickly. If you happen to attend Shetland Wool Week this year, I would love if you could help me out with this. I have a link in the show notes called Shetland Wool Week Transportation Survey. If you could find that and click through, I'm trying to find out how people transported themselves during Shetland Wool Week. It will take 10 minutes or less for you to complete the survey, and it would be a huge help to me. Additionally, if you live in Shetland, you might get a direct email from me for a different survey because another part of this project will deal with cultural sustainability, and I'd like to ask you all some things about that. All the information that I gather for this assignment is anonymous, confidential. It will not be published. It's just going to be seen by me and my tutor and the course leader. That's it. And thank you in advance. Absolutely appreciated. Secondly, and I'm very sorry to have to say this, but my husband and I sat down with our 2025 calendars last night and planned out when I'll be away and when he'll be away and when we'll be busy with like dorm move-ins and family events. And I have to have an extended period of time next year when I have to be able to just focus on my master's thesis. And unfortunately, what all of this means is that I will not be able to do a Stitch and Pitch event in 2025, and that includes the one I was hoping to do in January. Sometimes you just have to be realistic about your time. This is a lesson I've been learning over and over for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's finally starting to sink in. I am very hopeful to pick up with them again in 2026. Hopefully, they are not going away. We're just being realistic about the time constraints of the second year of a master's degree program. I will have a few more things to share at the end of the interview, but I feel like we should get cracking along with things. Helen Robertson is an artist. She is a jewelry designer and a knitting designer and someone who thinks deeply about heritage and community. If you imagine those three things, jewelry designer, knitting designer, someone who thinks deeply about heritage and community, if you think about those as a Venn diagram of 3 overlapping circles, you will find that Helen works in all 3 of those areas, all the ways that those 3 areas overlap with one another, and also at the point in the center where they all overlap. She is a very generous mind and is one of the best teachers I've had the pleasure to learn from. Please enjoy this interview with Helen Robertson, and I will be back on the other side with a bit more to share with you. Helen, thank you for sitting down with me today to talk about your knitting life.
No bother. It's lovely to see you.
When I'm interviewing someone from Shetland, I always like to start by asking them about their early memories and experiences of knitting, because I feel like you have such interesting backgrounds with it. It's sort of in the air here, and I love hearing about your early days with it.
It's not really a memory, but it's recorded on a cassette tape. And I was probably about 3 or 4, and it was my dad. And I can remember going to this shop in Unst. It was in my grandfolk's house in Unst. And there was a shop called the Sculus. And there was a small My First Knitting type thing with this really bright pink and bright. It was the early 70s. So again, it was bright. And plastic needles. And I can remember, I have heard the recording of me working with this kit. I mean, I can remember the kit visually, but the recording is me trying to knit. We learned to knit with Dad. Even at that age, I had massive goal. So I was knitting a cardigan for my mom, which is would have been about 3 or 4 stitches wide. But that's the earliest recording of me learning to knit. And then we had knitting in primary school, which, to be honest, I didn't really enjoy because we weren't allowed to speak, and I'm a speaker. So I always got trouble for speaking. And also I thought it was unfair because the boys didn't have to do it, but we had to do it, and it was every week. And while we were in the classroom doing the knitting in a separate room, then we would come back to our own classroom, and the boys would have been doing fantastic crafts, like they did macrame and they did that string pictures with the nails, and we were doing the same repetitive motion once a week, reluctantly. And they were getting this range of things, and that just really didn't seem fair to me at all. And so I kind of resented it. I mean, I quite enjoyed the process, but the situation seemed unfair. And as I got older, I think I did make such a fuss about the macrame that I think we ended up in primary six. We did get macrame because I couldn't believe we'd missed that. And we'd come back to the class, they would be doing this fantastic thing. So
what was the argument then for the boys to be doing those other sorts of crafts? Was that sort of like preparation for working on the boats? Because I know like macrame is a lot of knot tying.
I think it was just that the girls had knitting once a week, so the class teacher had to then entertain the boys for an hour. I don't think they were doing maths, but again, I think they were always doing something enjoyable. But it's still the macrame and the string pictures is what sticks in my mind. Is feeling I'm missing out. And then in secondary, so that was primary school, and I mean the wonderful thing was we made a Humpty Dumpty with just some garter stitch bits and pieces, and then maybe something else. And we were straight into knitting Fair Isle by, I mean, about primary 3 or 4. So we're kind of like 8, 9 kind of age, and doing Fair Isle. And then by the time we were in primary 6, which is 10, 11, we were knitting Lopey jumpers and full-on Lopey jumpers, because there was a shop in Larwick called Syverson's that sold Icelandic wool and Lopey yarn and patterns. So that did feel like an achievement. It did feel, and oh, that lovely thick yarn. Kind that you could knit much faster with that. Something. I can't remember anything. I can remember the Humpty Dumpty, Fair Isle purse, Lopey jumper. There must have been something in between, but I can't really remember what it was. And then in secondary school, we didn't, I mean, knitting tuition stopped in primary. And then secondary, well, I still knitted, but I was knitting, oh, this might be somebody might learn for this, but I was knitting other folks' patterns. So am I knitting my auntie a bead jacket, and I knitted jumpers. I did that thing with the big needle and the thin needle, and I knitted this gorgeous electric blue mohair jumper. And I knitted just jumpers for people, and but always frustratedly, because I really found following patterns really difficult. That I just used, I mean, I don't know if I was swearing as a young teenager, but it certainly had that feeling of frustration, and I managed to do it, but there was always a piece that wasn't very enjoyable. And really the switch came for me when I stopped following other folks' patterns and I started creating my own. And then that turned what had been a trial really into such a pleasure, that the difference, the kind of allowing myself to ignore other folks' patterns and everything and just do my own thing was really freeing.
Well, you have certainly done your own thing in the subsequent years. The amount of creativity that has come out of you is astounding, I think, as far as material use and the things that you've been knitting. And even we'll talk a little later about you've developed your own technique of knitting as along the way as well. And yeah, some brains aren't meant for patterns, some people do better thinking outside of those constraints. And I think you're definitely one of those. So we spoke a little bit before we began the interview, and I said, I just there's so much that you've done. I think maybe taking it topic by topic is the best way. And I know a lot of people know you from your work with knitted wire. And so I'd like to start by talking about that and um, how that occurred to you and some of the different ways that you've applied that idea of knitted wire in your career.
I was at university and I was making jewellery using like thicker wire and beads
Mm-hmm.
and pliers. And I mean, very basic sewing, making earrings. Like, and I did do a technique where I must have had knitting needles and a vise. I mean, I wasn't doing art, but I must have had some craft materials with me. And I did a kind of thing where I made a thing that looked like knitting, but made it out of wire and I really quite liked that design and made dangly earrings. But it was still not using knitting. It was thicker wire that I was manipulating. And I was knitting other folks' patterns still. Again, I was living somebody else's life, I think, really, because I was doing a subject I had no interest in and this. But when I came home, somebody was getting married. One of my friends was getting married, and there was a kind of a pattern at that time that folk would go to Aberdeen or the mainland of Scotland to get their bridal clothes. They'd been to find a dress, but they came home and said, "We didn't buy a tiara though, Helen, because we thought you could make ones much better than the ones we'd seen." And I was really like, oof, because at that time I'd only was only making jewelry for friends. And it felt like such a responsibility and such a challenge. And I was a bit anxious, I think, that kind of it's going to be such a big day and such an important item, a tiara on somebody's wedding day. It just
Mm-hmm.
felt really overwhelming. And I drew out lots of designs. And one of the designs I drew it was using the lace or a hat like a shawl, a fine lace knitted shawl, because I knew the story my mom had told me about the women in Unst who had knitted their shawls and then had gotten married in this using the shawl as a veil. And some
Mm-hmm.
of the shawls were like 6 feet square. Beautiful, beautiful knitted lace. And the peaks would be around her head, the peaks of the lace edge would be around her head. So I thought with that tradition, that if I could recreate that peaks and if in somehow that was able to support its own weight, we were doing up an old house and somebody was stripping wire. So I'd found like a thin piece of copper wire. So I had been trying to knit with that. And I can remember it was a roasting hot day in May 2001, it would have been. And then this call came about this tiara. So then I had some old beading wire, just that kind of, what looks like aluminium coloured. I don't know if it's zinc or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, but it won't be zinc, but it's some kind of silver coloured wire, but it's not silver. So I used the old beading wire to try out the lace, and it worked. And I showed the bride, and she was delighted. So then I kind of did a bit of research and found that I could use fine silver wire to knit. But at that time, when I was doing it first, maybe the wire has progressed in the past, whatever that is, 20 odd years, but I had to physically sit in one position. I couldn't move. Like I couldn't go to the bathroom or anything. I had to sit until I'd finished the item I was making because in case the wire broke.
Oh,
Because it
wow.
was important for me that it was made out of a single piece of wire. Whereas now, maybe my technique has gotten better and the wire is maybe slightly different. That I can set it down and pick it up again. I have developed the technique and taught like knitting with wire because I think folk when they knit with wire they most often use too thick wire and then it's hard, it's difficult. And
Yeah.
also you have to be really careful to never knit over a kink. Like quite a lot of your time when you're knitting is spent almost like smoothing the wire and you need to
Mm-hmm.
handle it gently but firmly. And I kind of had a bit of a ting moment when I realised that actually this was knitting that it was possible to make a living or some kind of a practice because it was in a precious material, folk valued it differently. Because prior to that, I
Mm-hmm.
had been knitting and selling fishermen's hats. I knitted dozens and dozens of fishermen's hats, but one hat would take me like 2.5 to 3 days, and I'd get
Uh-huh.
£25 for it. So yeah, and even
Wow.
then, that was at the higher end of the price that you could charge for that
Mm-hmm.
garment. and I'd knit at Feral Mice, which was about £50 an hour. And although I enjoyed doing it, I saw that it wasn't a way to realistically earn a living. And then I went on to do the lampshades because they put a call for the Shetland Museum. Anybody that was wanting to put some craft into the new museum to be commissioned to make some craft. So I thought I could maybe try making lampshades. And I found with that I was just so delighted. Every step, it's not like I started this journey thinking I was going to achieve it. If you get what I mean, every step, I'm being really grateful to that person or that organization for believing in what I was trying to do. And because knitting was quite, like we're speaking 2003, 2004, that kind of time, pre-Wool Week, knitting was not really valued. It was in Shetland. It was quite like things sold for very little money, and folk had a kind of disdain for it. And at that time, most of the time, if you saw somebody wearing a feral Gansey, it was as a joke. Like it was for a henny night or a stag night, it wasn't really valued and treasured in the way that it deserved to be. And Shetland lace was like that too. I wanted to create a way making folk kind of look up, like physically alter their opinion of the craft, and also to kind of introduce it to a new audience. And the lampshades made folk physically look up to it. And I think engaged folk that would never normally looked at it, then because it was metal, it was like,
Right.
oh, okay, you've done it out of metal. And so that made it more impressive rather as it had done it out of wool, although it was exactly the same
Right.
stitches. I did have to do the lampshades. Well, I did do the lampshades in the round because I didn't want the seam. And it was great. It was really exciting. I mean, I was a tiny part of a massive project, but it was really great being in on something big. And there's a couple that hang slightly squint, so I have to be careful where I sit if I go to the museum because they hang in the museum restaurant. And that's kind of out with my control, but I have to be careful where I sit when I'm in the restaurant, so I slightly squint one. But yeah, it was, and that, with that, I realized I think that was 0.71 millimeter wire. I had to use aluminium, or aluminum, as you would say, because I had to find the thickest wire I could manipulate through knitting. Because when you hold wire up to a light, then it disappears. If the wire's too thin, you don't see it. So
That's a
because the
good
light
point.
was behind it, I had to get as thick. So the thickest wire I could knit with was 0.71. I have knit it with 0.1, but it's a nightmare. But 0.71 was doable. It was quite physical on the shoulders, but when I knitted the lampshades, I had 3 burns under 4. So thankfully, my partner at that time, he would look after the children. I would go in the caravan and knit. Like I had to remove myself and knit this lampshades. It was a great project to be involved in. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you say, they're still hanging in the museum now. If anyone comes to Shetland and eats at Haystock, you
Yeah.
look up and see the
Yeah.
Shetland lace lampshades that are beautiful. And I know that you've done more of that as well, and you teach a class online for people to knit their own lampshades as well as doing the tiara classes online as well for people.
Yeah. The lampshades, I did a project like a post-COVID project where I get around all the islands in Shetland and taught lampshade classes. And that was, I think, one of the best projects I've been involved in. It was so brilliant because we'd all been that isolated. And I think particularly in the Isles, the pandemic was a really difficult time, and we've not got any intensive care facilities in Shetland. So everybody was particularly concerned about it. And because we have, well, like the example of Fair Isle, like the person that runs the shop is also the safety person for the airport. So, like, if you knock her out, then you're knocking out a lot of facilities for other
Yes.
folk. So it was just really difficult. So to have the pleasure of going to these islands, we lampshades and wire, and oh, it was amazing. It really was amazing. And I mean, like Fettler, there was 18 folk that came, Well, the population is only 36. Okay, so and there was three generations that came in Fettler, and there was folk that came at hidden and knit it for 20 years, or they really got into it, and then it meant that the whole basis of the project was this idea of like lighthouses communicating with one another across the sea when you couldn't physically meet, but you were connected through this lighthouses. And so it was just, I really loved that project because I've taught it online and I've taught it at Woolwich. There's this wire table lamps across the world, which is
All
lovely.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just one of many community projects that you've done through the years. And I know there was another during COVID project that you did that I was lucky enough to get into. And then also I know that you did your speed crafting classes for a while too. What was your inspiration for doing these community-based projects? And if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about them.
Well, I think in the pandemic, especially, I think I realized that you needed something once a week. You needed something to look forward to once a week. And it might have been like a rubbish TV program that you watched once a week, but it's something once a week to mark the time and to have something to look forward to. So I think it's mindful marking that you're speaking about
Mhm.
online, and that was done through Shetland Arts. It was great in that there was just this world on your kitchen table when all you were seeing was I mean, I'm really, really lucky that I had my husband and four children, so there was a lot of us to live with. Okay, I certainly would not have been happy on my own. It was great having company.
Yeah.
And so, but having this, I was aware that some folk that were coming to Mindful Marking didn't have that they were on their own. So I got really lovely letters after that project. Just well, one wife said she looked forward to it like a child looks forward to Christmas. It was just
No.
really lovely. And I think it did help folk. And the whole idea, it was like a project that would maybe take an hour or two, because I like folk to finish things too. So it was things that
Mhm.
you could knit in the time. I remember
Right.
then you did that bunting that just went on for miles.
You know?
There was things that the whole idea was that you looked at the pattern and instructions, but very quickly you didn't need patterns or instructions, and you could just knit and kind of connect with your knitting. And during that, there was one wife that said, because I would say, right, can put off your radio, kind of try and be in a quiet place. And there was one wife that said she'd never knit it in silence before. And
Mm.
that to me seemed quite strange, just never having had complete focus and be completely at one with your work that you were doing. So, and then this Woolwich, then I was sitting in the Islesborough Cafe and I could see this wife and I was thinking, sure I ken that wife. And then she'd been on, coming to the end of the pandemic. As the pandemic went on, things got a bit easier. We had vaccines and you could kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. So
Mhm.
one of the last groups I had, they really enjoyed it and they wanted to keep going. But I didn't feel I was able to facilitate the group every week because I was running other classes online. But one of the group took on to continue it. So Cashman, he still runs the group, and it thought it was on that group. They still meet once a week. And there's been a legacy to that.
When I was part of the group for a while there, I got a sense that it was really serving people in very individual ways. Like, for instance, I also had my husband and two children all at home, so I had people to talk to. The thing I appreciated about it is that I could just come to Mindful Mac and be with other knitters and just have that hour a week where I could just knit and be quiet and, as you say, just make a little thing and, put a period at the end of the hour and
Mhm.
just relax, during that time. And so it was very helpful to me in that way. But I remember people in our group who, like, some of them were just extremely stressed. Some people were there on their own. We were all sort of navigating that time differently. But it was, as you say, just a time to come and be quiet and be quiet together. and just
Yeah.
sort of acknowledge what we were all going through. So
Mhm.
thank you,
It is,
Helen. It's
yeah,
beautiful.
in Shetland Arts, it was them that funded the project. But I think that I found that it's always difficult when you've got a group. How do you end it, and how do you I mean, that last group didn't end; they continued on their own. But I did find that quite responsible. But at the same time, it was very draining. I mean that
Yeah.
because you were trying to keep everybody up, I suppose.
Mm.
And I did I always after that class I had to sleep for a good couple of hours just to recover.
Yeah.
And it felt quite a big responsibility. And I kind of felt my lack of kind of mental health training, to be honest, because I could see it was helping, but I had no resources to okay, I'm not a therapist. So I
Mm-hmm.
felt I couldn't really offer maybe what some of the folk were needing, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
it did give them a connection and a break, like a breather once a week, and something
Yeah.
to look forward to, just what I had been trying to do.
Right.
But what I've done with my own classes now, because it's always difficult when you have a group and but the group online and everybody gets on and then it ends. So now I'm doing a thing like a legacy class thing. So if you've done, I can't remind Dan what else you've done, but say you did lampshade class with me. And then if I run the lampshade class again, you can come on it for free, just if you want to, because to try and keep a connection going. It
Uh-huh.
was the only way I could think to do it, right? Because I kind of get my head around doing something every week. But it's like a legacy. If you've done any class with me before, you can join on if I'm running it again. And
Oh,
then
that's
that way,
brilliant.
yeah, thank you. Folk can kind of connect. If they've had a relationship with somebody, then they might meet again online and just to try and build that online community.
Yeah, I'd love that idea. You might see me pop in again.
I will. Yeah.
I took the tiara class, and I will admit I have this idea and I have this vision for it, and I got about halfway through, and then you know how it can be, I'm sure, where everything else takes over. So I still have the box. I refuse to put the box anywhere else than on my table. It's still on my work table in my office. It's still there. So I see it, and I think, I'm going to get back to that and get that finished.
Well, that's
So,
perfect. I'm running the tiara. It's design your own tiara class again. It was really a course. In I think it's February. So you're welcome to come as a
okay.
legacy member. Put it in the email newsletter that anybody that's done the course before can come on again as a legacy to complete it. Because you had
Yeah,
a great design that you were working on. And it
I
is
know.
about completion. I like to think if somebody's paying me and coming on a class that they're actually finishing the thing that they're starting.
That's good. That might be exactly what I need, actually.
Yeah.
Before we get too far away from talking about your knitting with wire, I did want to give you the opportunity to talk about the Croft House project that you did with it, because I thought it was absolutely a beautiful concept. Yeah, so I'll just let you explain the inspiration for that and how you carried it out. It ended up being sort of a mixed media project in the end.
My son Haki was young, like a baby young, and there was a project going called agricultural art. There was funding going for agricultural art. So I thought about having a fence, like marking a section of a fence in wire, and I was going to have 12 sections, all at different locations around Shetland that were kind of viewpoints. So like
Mhm.
Aisnes Lighthouse and that kind of thing. And a trail so that you could go on a trail to see others knitted parts of knitted fancies around Shetland. And I came second in this funding bid. And the reason I came second was I was told that it was thought it was too radical for crofters, this idea, this knitted fans. But I was actually so glad because I realised that Haki was a baby, that lasses were young, and I would have been spending so much time on this project, but like I was relieved when I didn't get it. I've got other things to do again.
Yeah.
Um, so I was really, really quite relieved. But the idea never really left me, and I just really, really wanted to do it. And then I realised that we've got a Rylock fencing around Warcraft, which is like the kind of window kind of fencing. So then I thought, well, actually, I could knit small squares and set the squares into the fence without that disturbing any crafter. Okay, there was
Mhm.
no need for anybody to be vexed about it. So that's what I did, and I knitted. I can't remember if that was 0.71 or 0.56 millimeter wire, but it was aluminium wire again. And the interesting thing is, with that fences, like they're everywhere in Shetland, but I just assumed that they were all the squares were the same size, but when they're actually different. They get smaller, they get lower. The height is less as you go down the fence. So I
Oh.
knitted different size pieces and I attached them to the fence. And then there was an old craft house. I mean, the fence was quite a lot. It was around the craft. It wasn't just one area. The old craft house, there was like an old kind of rotten window frame that was still inside it. It was derelict, yeah, like completely derelict. And I wanted to knit something kind of in tribute to that folk, because Lynn Abrams had written a book called Myth and Materiality. And she'd found that in the kind of 1800 to 1900 period, then, because of various reasons, because of wars and disasters and emigration, that Shetland's population was mostly 3 women to 1 man. So all the things all the crafting that had been attributed to a male population was mostly being done by women. I mean, photos of men ploughing were taken, which led folk to assume that all the crafting was being done by the men. But the truth was that the men weren't there, that they were at the fishing, or they were at sea, they were at the whaling, or sadly they died. And it was young boys and old men that was left, and with this big female population. That's why some of the lace patterns are named. It was the same time that they were developing lace patterns. So some of the patterns are named after crafting things and things that are around the folk. And I wanted to make this lace shawl in the window, so I did a brand iron aging, and this was in silver wire. This would have been in 0.2 mil silver wire. I did a brand iron aging because that's what they cooked on, was the brand iron. And then I did a tree of life border, and a candlelight middle. And I put it in the window at the house. And this was another time where like outside folk have helped me, and that somebody, I think it was maybe Hazel Hewson, I don't know how they even knew I was doing it, but had suggested that I apply for funding to get a photographer. And I'm so glad I did. And that I did cry that day, because it was kind of the first time that what I was doing was kind of recognised as art. Because I got a funding through the Arts Fund to pay for a photographer, and it was Mark Sinclair of Fat Shoot Photography that came and took wonderful photos of the fence and the house. And I'd knitted around the stone in a brick wall just to kind of show the kind of how important the knitting and textile industry was to Shetland's survival, really. And then it came a tremendously terrible storm, like it was November, and like it was not good weather. Like to the extent you couldn't go out, and you couldn't get down to the house, this craft house, to retrieve the lace. And then by the time that we did get down, the wind had blown the window frame and the lace and everything down over the field in front, and just ripped it. It was riven, as we would say,
Oh, wow.
riven. But it felt quite right, because when my mom was into family history and research, and she'd researched the craft. Now I can never remember the year, if it was 1911 possibly. But the census at that year had given who was living in that house was a widow and her 3 daughters that were all in their 30s. They were all unmarried, and their occupation in the census was given as works on own account at home knitter. So that was that 4 women exactly, and I thought that's exactly what I'm saying. And I didn't kind that when I chose that kind of, so it still feels really quite, oh, that's tingles through me, but that was
Yeah.
exactly what I was trying to illustrate it. And so I mean, but the fact that it got a ribbon, it was fine because I had done it, and that was, and Mark had captured it beautifully. And then Anne Johnson saw that because I had an exhibition in the stairwell at the Bon Hoga, and Anne had seen it, and she said that I had inspired her, and she was going to knit a fence. So I'm delighted that Anne has realised that vision in kind of big style. So in some kind of twine, I think she used. So I'm really, really glad. And it was just another thing that I'd gotten out of my system. So I didn't
Yeah.
need to do it anymore. It's good.
I'm so glad that the photos got an exhibition too, so that more people were able to see that. And I know that you shared it in one of, I can't remember if it was in the Mindful Mackin or in the knitting, the designing your own tiara, but you shared that with us too. And I remember you first telling us the story and discovering that it was, for women who were making their living by knitting. And as you said, like, I just got chills from that. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing.
It's okay. Yeah. And then the next kind of wire knitting, as far as wire knitting goes, the kind of other development I did was we knitting because I have a kiln, a small kiln, and I'd been doing some stuff. I was trying to combine. You get this stuff called silver clay,
Mhm.
and it's basically I'm going to invent this percentages. I'm not 100% sure, but say it's like 99% silver and like it's ground up silver powder and some binder. And
Mhm.
it's kind of a bit like, well, we got plasticine or blue tack or like sticky tack that you would put on the walls, Play-Doh, that kind of
Mhm.
way. So you can manipulate it and make things, and then you fire it in the kiln and it burns off the binder and you're left with pure silver. So I'd been experimenting a bit with that, trying to find ways of combining the knitted wire and the silver. And then I discovered I made slip with it. So I knitted a lamb's horn out of silver, and it could help. It was structural because I mean knitting is amazing. You can make any shape you want. So I knitted this lamb's horn, and then I made slip with the clay, and then I painted the clay on, and then fired it, and then did a slight bit of enamel on the top, and I think that's possibly one of the favorite things that I've made because it really genuinely does look like a lamb's horn,
Mhm.
and made it into a kind of an amulet. And that was a really like that was a really great technique. I'd love to spend more time developing that technique because it's infinite what you can do with that. And the other thing I did with the wire was I did a project we it was Shetland Arts and Fife. I can't mind Fife Contemporary Arts or something. So I was paired with a poet for Fife, and like I was a maker in Shetland, and then makers in Fife was paired with poets in Shetland, and vice versa. And I did this. Looks like a dead bird. It was inspired by Paula Jennings' poem, and I was quite proud of that, I suppose. And we'd have our house was flooded. Our house flooded, and we had to be out of the house for 6 months. But of course, the deadline was coming for the exhibition, and the children were all under 10 and everything. But we ended up relocating to this house that was right on a beach. And in the house that was right on a beach was this bird skulls. So I was
Mm.
able to just use the bird skull as a template, I suppose, or inspiration. So I knitted a bird skull, and then I knitted feathers, and then I knitted this, well, Shetland, what is it, krang, which is just like a skeleton kind of remains. So I knitted the krang, bird krang, and that is now in a collection in Switzerland. The lamb's horn is in Canada. I kind of, in somewhat, no, I'm glad they've gone, but at the same
Mhm.
time, I kind of regret selling them. But again, I've got photos, so that's okay. I've got
There you
photos.
go.
I think that's all with the wire. I think that's all I've done with wire knitting.
One of the things you've done is you've actually developed a new form of knitting color work, which you call fizzy knitting. And I know you have published a pattern that uses the technique and you do teach classes in it, but I feel like it hasn't been sort of widely disseminated yet. And I was wondering if you would talk sort of about the technique and maybe about some of the issues around it.
Well, this was again, my children were small. I think the youngest was maybe about 3. And I was I used to knit bangles around a wooden bangle and then felt it. And I was knitting a bangle for my friend and I was using really simple slip stitch, the one that you can get the circles with, like honeycomb slip stitch. And I'd altered it a bit so that there was more circles rather than oblongs.
Mhm.
And then I thought, hold on a minute, I could use Fair Isle with this. So that's what I did. And somebody said when I showed it to them, because it looks fantastic. When I showed it to them, they said, Helen, put it away, put it away, hide it, because if somebody sees you and they'll claim it. Because I think in
Mhm.
Shetland we've got quite a long history, like innovation, but also folk coming in and seeing that innovation and claiming it for their own, and even patterns like reproducing people's exact patterns under their own name. And it's always shocking, like even things that are considered traditional here, and somebody will publish the pattern. Well, how does that work? And the same way, like folk that have written patterns and then shared it, and then somebody else has pinched it, really stolen it. So I did hide the technique away. I hid it away because I had no time to develop it. And then a few years ago, I thought, okay, this is silly. I need to share it because it felt selfish keeping it to myself. But I want to be public, but I was in the process of trying to write a book about it. And I was getting on really pretty good when the pandemic hit.
Mm.
And we had 4 children, 2 of whom were doing their major exams, one rubbish computer, really rubbish internet, all 4 well, they were having to be homeschooled. They were at 3 different schools. It was a nightmare. So all the work I'd done to that point was just shelved, and so that would have been 2020, like March 2020. I'm still not back. I'm getting there. I'm getting to the stage where I think I can go back and look at it again. Mostly because that children are now starting to leave home. So I've not widely shared it because I'm still hoping to make a book about it. It's
Mhm.
fantastic technique, and even just the other day there was a student I had a couple of years ago, and at the craft fair and the makers market, and she was showing me all these things that she's made using the technique, and like really excited about it. And it is just a combination of slip stitch and Fair Isle. And I think I read it somewhere about I read somebody was describing slip stitch knitting as Fair Isle without the misery. That meant nothing to me because I love Fair Isle. I thought, what's miserable about Fair Isle? And so it's just pure joy because I love colour. Colour is like my main thing. And at the moment, I'm really looking at Joseph Albers and all his trying to make 3 colours into 4 and 2 colours into 3. And I'm really enjoying exploring colour in more depth. But
Mhm.
yes, that will be coming in the future. But I've got quite a list of patterns that I want to complete and publish before I go back to that. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's coming.
Okay. Stay tuned, everyone. It's
Yeah,
coming. And it is a lovely technique. And are you doing online classes with that one for Fizzy
I've
Fair Isle?
there's a Shetland expression. I don't know if it's a universal expression, but I'm kind of drawn in me oars, which means going a bit slower because I
Mhm.
tend to like I get ideas and then and it just it's quite overwhelming as far as my time goes. Can I because it's a new idea and so I need to develop it and so I'm just kind of drawn in my oars. I've got a wire bracelet class soon. I've got a tiara course in January, February. I've got a puffin hunter again, and I'm just trying to ease, be a
Yeah.
bit easier. And I suppose, like, I've got a daughter at home that is probably only going to be home for another year and a half. So, like, when your children are toddlers, then they're really precious because they're changing so much. But then, equally, when they're teenagers, then your time with them is so limited,
Mm.
nearly gone. So, I think once
Yeah.
I have an empty nest, then that'll be my project.
That is a good reminder, I think. You have conversations with women who are designers and have family and other things going on too. And Sometimes people can be very insistent that they do more for their benefit, and we have to remember, no, like family first and
Yeah,
mental health, and
yeah. I think
walking
that's
is a
my
lot safer than running sometimes. So,
yeah. So like 2 years time, I could put money on there not being only being me and Stuart at home.
mhm.
And actually, he's a seafarer, so I make it
It may just be you.
home. Yeah, yeah. I mean, what's it? How's it be? Yeah. Wow.
So everyone be patient.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure when this will air yet, but we are talking just the week after Wool Week wrapped up. And I would say, like, you had this wonderful Puffin Day experience that you put on. And I know a few years back, that's when I had your Fizzy Fair Isle class that was up at the Delting Boating Club. And that was a lovely sort of all day class with lovely meal provided in between. And we had a beautiful view. And I know you've done classes about Gunnister Man that have been sort of fuller experiences that have been had history components and the knitting and the scenery and the beauty of Shetland. And I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about your take on these Shetland experiences that you've created for visitors who come to the event.
First of all, I'm just so glad about Woolwich. I think Woolwich's just such a fantastic thing to have happened in Shetland, and it's kind of been waiting to happen. It's been
Mm.
all our grannies and great grannies and great great grannies. It's like it's thanks to them that it's happened because it's all their perseverance, and that's why Shetland has a name for knitwear. And I kind of think that, like I said about 2003, 2004, knitting not being really regarded highly here, but Woolwich has just turned it on its head, and folk have realised, I think, the volume of folk that come here. And actually, I kind of think that we're like it makes because I mean it's a long dark winter in Shetland, so really tough, can be really tough being here all year round. And it's easy to get annoyed about the weather, and it's easy to get annoyed about the dark and everything. But then once a year there's this like thousand odd folk coming and just saying hallelujah about the rain, kind of just loving everything. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, kind of being so grateful about Shetland and about knitting and everything. And I think it's done with good. It's given with more pride in our place, and or certainly personally. And it's kind of like we're meeting your expectations. I think there's so many more folks spinning their own yarn, and shops are really making an effort with what they provide. So I think Woolwich is a fantastic thing, and I think that my only regret is that I cannot run classes and also partake. Can I wish it was 2 weeks and I could just do 2 weeks, do a week of running classes and a week to go into classes. But I kind of feel that folk are coming here for so far away and spending so much to get here that I enjoy far more running whole days. I really prefer running a whole day because then you can have lunch together and you can eat together and you're not frantically running from workshop to workshop. So you can really kind of get to know the other. When normally my workshops are anything from 8 till maybe 20, depending. The bigger days are usually more number 8 to 18 kind of thing. But you can kind of get to know one another and spend time eating together. And that's the workshops I enjoy the most, is when it's a whole day and we can kind of relax and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's true. It's one thing I know more and more people are trying to advise people who come to Shetland Wool Week to pace yourself.
Hmm.
And because the temptation is that it is so difficult for people to get here that I think a lot of people think, well, if I'm going, I have to do it all. I have to get out and
Yeah.
make the most of it. And you just
And
end up exhausted and not remembering anything by the end of it. So yeah,
I
it's nice
think
to have the full day to just focus on the one thing and enjoy the people you're with.
and I think too, like it, like I'm just astounded at the amount of ganses and hats and shawls and scarves and it's coming out of folks' cupboards and on display. I mean, nearly every island has a display in their hall, and I mean,
Yeah.
Sanus had a massive display for one day. The folk are putting in so much effort, and it's wonderful, really. It's really wonderful that all this is coming into the light. So actually, I mean, had I not have been working that day, I would have been in the Sanus Hall,
Hmm.
just taking in all that fabulous, like, vintage and contemporary knitwear.
Yeah,
So
it's wonderful to hear too
what?
that it's starting to, it's trickling down to the younger people too, and they've started wearing their yokes and ganzis again to
Yeah.
school, just
Mhm.
just because they want to, because they like them. It's part of the
Yeah.
style, and I mean, I think that's one of the big wins of Shetland Wool Week is that it's made the local knitting cool again for the younger people to wear and enjoy.
Yeah, and I think, look, if you think of Pharaoh, then you think of that, was it the Cullen jumper? You think of that Faroese jumpers and Gudrun with that beautiful
Hmm.
loose knit stuff. And then Iceland, well, you think about Lopi jumpers. And Norway, well, they've got the regional jumpers that they wear. And then Shetland, we've got we're less and we're Fair Isle. And it's kind of, I think folk are like kind of, oh yeah, kind of, this is and if you go away wearing a Feral Gansey, even though you can buy ones from Marks and Spencers and Barora, I mean they're not authentic, and you can tell. Okay, certainly a Shetlander can tell if it's like that. Oh, sorry, Ballistic Detective program. Buy some Shetland Ganseys. You'll see an odd cowl or something, but just I mean there might be one or two, but it's not authentic. Like put what's her tosh, put her in a yoke, can get a yoke at
Yeah.
Cardigan from Shetland, no for fat face or whatever it's comfy. Just
Yeah. And
so I mean
that's
there's
so
a
it's so
huge
sad to me
opportunity.
after an episode when
Oh,
someone will put up a screen grab and say, "Oh, who's the designer for this one?" And you're like, "Well, Marks and Spencer, like that didn't come from here."
and I actually don't think that the producers have realised the massive textile community that if they were showcasing genuine Ganseys, how many more viewers they would attract.
Hmm.
Like what the Cullen did. Can I think they're missing a trick, and it wouldn't take much
Yeah.
to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, from your lips to the producer's ears, hopefully they'll
I did Mark Penny figures. I don't know if
I
you saw them.
yeah, so
They're quite cute.
that's another thing that I really love about what you do. And I think it's that mind that doesn't want to work from patterns is you have all of these wonderful, whimsical pieces that you've created. And, that's basically what Mindful Mackin was doing all of these little projects. Like we did a craft house and we did a flower and we did a little heart and this year in the Shetland Wool Week Annual, there's the Flying Flock garland, which I'm like, I can't wait to make that. Um, and the little Jimmy Perez from the detective show,
Yeah.
and his little friends are with him too. And is it just a matter of you see something and your brain just goes, "Oh, I could make that," and you get to it, or do you start looking for ideas, or how does that connection, what's that little bing that goes off and makes you think, "I'm gonna knit that"?
I think it's more of a disease, I think, Anne. It's like I kind of feel it's like well the only way I can describe it is if you kind of like a Catherine wheel. It's kind of like a combination between a Catherine wheel and a what's that stuff? Dandelions with the bits coming off of them, and every Catherine wheel has got another cat dandelion or a kind of there's just I've just got millions. It's like I've got an infinite pool of everything. Um, and it's more selecting. It's more about selecting and spending the time. Like, cause we mindful marking, then I did that Matchbox knits. I loved Matchbox knits. But the problem is I would need an equal and opposite twin that could say like that could do the business side and could do the that side of it because I'm like Matchbox knits. I designed things that you could knit around an actual matchbox, which I don't know what maybe like 4 centimeters by 3 by 1, that kind of size. And then you could hang it on your Christmas tree and you could have a button so that you could put a sweetie or something in it. So it was like an Advent Christmas matchbox thing, but um which is a bit mad. The Matchbox turkey was great. That was really good. That was really good. I was proud of that one. But then I'm finished with it. I didn't want to do anything with it. I just wanted to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. rather than do something again. I can't do anything twice. That fly and flock was a bit of a struggle for me to have to. I actually had done 10. I did 10 lace patterns and 10 heads, and then Victoria was just like, Helen, okay, we kind of have it's just taking up too many pages, so I had to shrink it down and just do four. Is there four lace things and 5 heads, and but yeah, it's no. I don't have a problem thinking things up.
When you have the idea, like for instance, you mentioned the Matchbox turkey. Do you just sit down and keep working at it until you have it right, or is there sort of a whole pile of half figured out Matchbox projects that haven't come to life yet?
It's mostly figured out before I even start knitting. It spends quite a long time in my head, along with all the other things.
Uh-huh.
It's got in my head, and then it's kind of like when we were young, we had a seawater tank in our porch, and it had sea anemones in them. The sea anemones are fascinating tank to have, and they would kind of boil and bubble and like go into themselves, and then every now and again, then this tiny sea anemone would pop out. And that's kind of like me. It's like my brain is just boiling and bubbling, and sometimes I say that to Stuart, like I kind of look like I'm not doing anything, but I really am working quite hard. Okay, because there's a lot going on, and then the design comes out. So it's usually pretty much figured out before I
Mhm.
start knitting.
And we should say, so just to explain for those who haven't seen the Shetland Wool Week annual for this year yet, the Flying Flock garland is a garland made up of sheep, and the sheep are made up of Shetland lace designs with a backing, so it's like lined. It's like a sheep with a layer of lace on the outside so that you can see the lace pattern against the sheep. And as you said, there's a number of them that you can then sort of repeat along the garland. But this is building on something that you've recently become interested in, which is the backed lace. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love Shetland lace, and I really love Carol Christensen's new book. Um,
Yes.
the name escapes me, but I mean, Shetland. I'll have the title Shetland
Shetland
lace
Shetland
somewhere.
Fine Lace Knitting, I believe it's called,
Yeah,
but I'll put a link for people too so they can click right over.
yeah, it's a fabulous book, and I just find it lace. Although I love it, look, I've usually knitted it in the Guild book. Then I've got a pattern that's knitted with quite thick needles and a reflective yarn. And then I did my deck chair project when I knitted a deck chair
Right.
in 12 hours on the webcams. But I really do love lace, but it's quite flimsy. So I'm trying to, well, I've kind of, it's not going to change the world, but it might change my world. But it's knitting a piece of lace and then backing it with either garter stitch or moss stitch and joining them together with an I-cord edge. So it's got, again, so many possibilities of what you could do, like patchwork, jackets, blankets, cowls, hats, gloves. There's so much you can do. Or sheep you can do. And I try, whenever I'm designing things, I try and do it as economically as I can so that there's at least, because the sheep look quite fiddly, they're not fiddly at all. I try and do it so that there's the least amount of sewing or the least amount of faff with it, so that it's a pleasure. I try and mark it, and even like the pretty legs, well, you only knit one I cord and then you pull it through and that gives you two legs. It's just pretty tricks like that so it's not as fiddly as it looks.
That's genius because I hate all that finish work stuff.
Exactly,
So
exactly. And
any
even, yeah, somebody was looking at it at the Maker's Market and said, no, no, but that's head's a nightmare. I said, the head's not a nightmare at all because it's knitted flat. The ears are cast on and cast off. And it's no minimal, minimal effort for maximum return. That's what I'm
right.
looking for.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned something a moment ago that I completely forgot about, and that's the deck chair project that you did. Was it last year or like time
It
has
was
no
last,
meaning anymore. I feel like it's all
no,
just a
no,
blur
no.
at this point.
It was last year. And again, I'd had COVID. I had COVID in January. I got COVID. And I think that was March that we did the deck chair. And I was completely zombified. I was just had no motivation, wasn't sleeping. And thankfully, JJ Jameson was involved in it, and he really drove me to get it done because I was just like pathetic at that. I couldn't really get going. To the extent that I had only because sorry, a bit of background. I was going to knit a deck chair seat in 12 hours on the webcams. It's going to be broadcast on Shetland webcams in Unst, and we'd hired this really lovely place to stay, a really beautiful place. But I hadn't even tell any of my Unst relatives or friends that I was coming to do it, and the marketing was really low. I at the last moment got an advert on Shetland News, and JJ very kindly made me a pretty flyer trailer thing. And I burnt my thumb. That was the other thing. It was just like everything was going wrong. I'd burnt my thumb. I couldn't knit, and but anyway, we got to Unst, and me and my mum had gone up the night before to try and get ready, and you could hear this kind of you could hear the sound of the waves going up the beach and coming down the beach. And we were quite high up. And when you look across, there's a sandy beach. And I couldn't really understand it. And then right underneath the hill that the house was on, there's a stony beach. And in the video, I mean, you would think it was mastered, but it's not mastered at all. It's genuinely the sea coming up and down the beach. It's just such a lovely sound. But anyway, it came to the event, and it was, I knew that I had practiced before I'd burnt my thumb. I'd practiced, and I knew that I could knit one repeat. I was going to be the print and the wave. I could knit one repeat in 40 minutes. And I knew I needed about 11 or 12 repeats to make the thing. And I thought, well, that's a bit boring. You need to have it more exciting. You don't want it to end at 8 o'clock at night. And you want it to be more exciting for folk. So I thought, right, to make it more exciting, we'll wind the yarn. So that'll take a bit of time. And I had this beautiful hand spun for Mary Kay that I used. And I had a reflective thread too that I was going to knit with. So me and Mum, and that also got Mum on camera because she wasn't going to be on the camera, but she had to come to help me wind the yarn. And then, it just makes me feel kind of emotional. Like some of my relations and friends we started coming, and like Hazel Lawrenson, and she's kind of like, well, she is a cousin, but she's also like kind of knitting hero. Again, she's fantastic. She's done all the patterns, or most of the patterns for the Heritage Centre in Unst, and she's so generous with her time and so skilled. And she came, and I'm fair to name fucking because I forget, but Mary, my lovely cousin Mary came, and Anne and Freda, and it was just such a wonderful thing that they came. But I started making mistakes in my knitting, and oh no, and because it was like this tribute piece to the folk that was lost in the Gloop disaster, it had to be right. I couldn't have mistakes in it. I mean, I couldn't have mistakes in it anyway, but especially because it was a tribute. So I had to take it back, and then the afternoon I was frantically knitting to see if I was going to do it, and then some more visitors came at night, and I was just so overwhelmed and so grateful because it made it so much more interesting for everybody, and it was wonderful to have that visitors, and yeah, it really made it much more interesting, and it's still on YouTube. Andy Stevens let me put it on YouTube, so it was broadcast on Shetland webcams, and I had no idea how many. Well, I was most concerned about. I knew there was it was being broadcast at the Shetland Music Festival in the foyer in Marill, and I'm not really a fan of being on camera or anything, so I was just trying to block that out because I knew that thought would cane me. So I was trying to block it. The fact that it was going across the world didn't bother me because I didn't know that folk, but the fact it was in Larwick was like. But no, it was a great thing again to do, and again it was an Unst, so that made it more special.
I remember I wasn't able to see it as it was happening because I just happened to be flying that day, so I missed it. And I pulled it up afterwards on YouTube and started watching, and I think I broke it up over 4 nights to watch it. But I watched the whole thing because, as you said, it was really interesting, like just starting with just you and your mom and talking as you were winding the yarn, and then having more and more people arrive and come in and out. And even the moments when it was, everyone sort of got quiet and was just doing what they were doing. Again, it just felt nice to because of course I was knitting as I was watching too, right? So it just to be sort of part of the group, I guess you would say, as you watched and have that quiet moment. And if I'm not, I'm pretty sure it's there in the Unst Heritage Center now. Yes, I think.
Yeah. It's hanging on the wall at Unst Heritage Centre. I
Yeah.
get to them. I mean, it was a mass. Look, it was really well done. I'm not speaking about my bit, but I'm speaking about J.J. Jameson, Liz Muzzer, and Andy Stevens. And I mean, they're really at the top of their game. Okay, they're brilliant. They're brilliant at what they do. And there was a lot of technical. It was like a film set. That was, I mean, they had cameras and microphones and some kind of a desk with all kinds of things. And Andy, I think, had been up the whole night because it worked okay, and then at 6 o'clock, then everything dropped out. So he'd had to figure out, and I think he'd had to reroute it through Edinburgh, and kind of it was. I mean, there's absolutely no way I could have done it on my own. Can I just didn't have that knowledge? But the three of them and Mum, Ken and me, it was definitely a team. I was on camera, but it was a team effort,
Hmm.
and it's a shame that it took so much because it would be great to do it again. I don't know what I would do, but it would be great. And there ended up there's about 3,000 odd folk that watched it, and it was I wrote about it for the 2023 Wool Week annual, the number
Hmm.
9. It's in that one. But yeah, and it was amazing to think it. It was just it was amazing.
Yeah, it's a great project. And again, just another example of these things that you come up with that are just fascinating.
Yeah, and again, another idea that I'd had when Haki was a baby, because I'd had a bit of an old deck chair lying, and I just was never getting it done. So it actually shut. I needed some kind of prompt to actually do it. I'd been wanting to knit a deck chair for years.
There's one more thing I wanted to ask you about is the ragtime knitting.
So basically, you're knitting with yarn. You're never knitting with a rag. The rag
Okay.
is never on your needle, but it's like woven in as you're knitting.
Mm.
And it's fantastic, and I really, really want to share it widely. I need to get a camera set up and share it on YouTube because it's a fantastic way of using up your old clothes or sheets or whatever. And because it's knitting, you can make 3D shapes, you can make flat shapes, and you can do it so you've got rags on the front and then knitting on the back, or you can do it so it's two-sided, and it's an amazing possibilities for that technique. And also just textile waste, to try and not be dumping more textiles, and to actually be, if they're past repair, you can cut them up and make them into something useful, like a blanket or a jacket or a hat or whatever it might be, a
Yeah.
vase. You need a liner for that.
Yeah. Or
But I
dried
will,
flowers.
yeah, I will get that on YouTube because I think it's too good a thing to not to share.
Yeah. So the technique, so I've seen some examples of things that you've made before with it. And the one that's coming to mind is like a Christmas tree shaped ornament that you did,
Oh
where
yeah.
it's, you're just using sort of shorter rags. And it almost looks, I haven't had a class yet, but it almost looks like you said, like you're sort of knitting around the rag and then forming a fabric that way. Would you describe it that?
Yeah, well, there's kind of three main ways you can do it. You can knit, well, I suppose four. You can knit garter stitch, and you can do the I'm kind of ragtime. You can do the ragtime thing on both sides. So you get a dancer fabric that's got a
Okay.
rag on both sides. Or you can do, you can do it with one single long strip
Okay.
fabric, a rag. Or you can do lots of short strips of rags, and you rag a row, and then you just knit a row without ragging. And then you rag another row. So then you get on the back, it looks like a knitted thing. You can see the knitting on the back, and on the front, you see the rag. And then
Oh,
what you can do with that technique is you can do some lace on the back so that you can, I think that tree that you're speaking about was done, kind of how you can knit a square for a stitch and increase and then decrease.
hmm.
I think that's how I did that tree, if I mind right. But I maybe altered the number of rows so it got more like a tree shape.
Hmm.
So because you've got your plain knitting on the back, then you can decrease and increase to alter the shape of the rag on the front. But that I've got to try and develop more. I really want to try doing like old shell and new shell and see how that affects the rag on the front. But there's just a mass of things that you can do. But I just wish I had more time or a whole like army of folk knitting. What I tell the
Right.
truth, that would be amazing. Yeah,
Or octopus arms or something.
yeah, or the ability not to ever need to sleep would be good.
Yeah, any of those things would work. Well, I clearly need to get in one of the ragtime classes too. So you're clearly a very creative person, Helen. Not only in that you have these ideas, but you also, I mean, you talk about how busy you are, but you're also finding ways and times to bring these things into the world. And I know a lot of people listening probably are having that feeling like, oh, I wish I could be more creative in my own life. Do you have any advice or guidance or thoughts that you'd like to share with people to help them develop that inner creativity themselves?
I think, but because I've taught an awful lot, like I've taught classes and crafts and stuff for about 33 years. And I think what I see we teaching through that is that folk, they need to have kind of courage and confidence. And even, I mean, even me, I didn't mean to sound it like that, but even when I've done artist things, it's the last couple of years I was knitting around seaweed and knitting it into jewellery, making it knitted jewellery using seaweed. Um, and maybe it was a post-COVID thing or something, but I was feeling really quite vulnerable about criticism. And there's a photo of me somewhere on Instagram, and you can see that I'm looking kind of defiant because I'm wearing this, in my mind, gorgeous. It was this piece of seaweed I found on the beach in Honest. Gorgeous piece of seaweed that I knitted around in wire and then wool. But you kind of need to have the guts to think, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and just shut down that negative voices that's in your head or that you think somebody else is going to say, well, like, what next? Is what Fox said. What next? Like in a negative way. But you just need to think, no, I'm doing this. I'm going to do this. You had to start where you're at. And when I'm teaching, I find that I have to start where the folk are at. You have to meet them where they're at. And it might be just altering colours in a yoke. It might be altering colours in a small thing that you're knitting, or it might be changing the stitch at the glove, or it might be doing. You just need to try things out and not be too judgmental. I think you need to kind of suspend judgment, and it is. I mean, some of the things I've done, it's quite a negative, look stupid. Can someone look at Matchbox Turkey? I mean, that is ridiculous. But then folk love it. Or I mean, even the less sheep, because like I think that now Dan, what's her name? There's an artist. She did a lecture in Shetland at one of the Shetland textile festivals about the myth I can't mind it. But it was basically that it was about function and this idea that knitting always has to be functional. The fallacy of function, I think it was called. How knitting hasn't always been functional. Because I think even like in Shetland, kind of, we'll know a swatch. Dear me, we will not swatch. We'll make a pair of gloves or a hat or a cowl as a swatch because it's this idea that you're wasting worse and you're wasting time. So trying to look on it as play and don't be like you have to have the courage of your own convictions, I think, too. Um, I think you need to be brave and be playful, I would
Yeah,
say.
I love that thought. And just the idea of just not not everything has to be the greatest thing you've that's ever been created. Like some things can just be silly or an experiment or just trying something out, you
Yeah,
know?
I think on that note, I think what we have new, and especially it's a bit dangerous that is AI stuff, but even before AI, what you're seeing on Instagram generally, or Facebook or Twitter or wherever you're looking, or the other thing, TikTok, it's folks' best. It's the best jumper they've ever made. It's the best shawl they've ever knitted. It's no their worst thing. So you're competing and it's global. So if you're trying to
Yeah.
compete, you've got a global designers, and just managing to just let at that, no be chasing likes. I think that's the thing, not be chasing likes and not be chasing. I mean, in the early days of Wool Week, then I would measure my own self-worth relating to ticket sales. And I've
Mhm.
learned not to do that because, like, even Puffin Day didn't sell out. There were still 5 tickets left. Kind of, and when you saw what it was, kind of everybody had a great day. It was more. I think they got so much that day. They had a lecture about birds. They had a fiddler. They had a life-size puffin. They had puffin cupcakes. They had kind of lunch. They had got tons of yarn. They got 3 patterns and so I've kind of learned not to be disheartened. I mean, last year I had a design your own balaclava class. There was only one person that signed up for that, and in the end, I told her, I said, look, I can go ahead if you want to, but if you don't want to, I can refund you. But yeah, no, she didn't want to do it, just with me, so that was fine. But that's fine. 5, 6 years ago, I'd have been devastated about that. No, it's fine. And actually, when it came to that, it's about maybe 11 year ago at Wool Week, then I had the speedcrafting day, and that's something I used to run. But I had Shetland tweed. We were making Shetland tweed hand bound books, and it was 5 stations. You were doing an hour at each station. We were making Shetland tweed brooches. We were making all this different things. And that whole day would take me 3 hours to set it up and 2 hours to take it down, and then 6 hours to run. And there was one person booked on it, and I can remember sitting at the table. And at the time, I'd had like a 5, 7, 9, 11-year-old also. And just sitting with my head in my hands and thinking, should I cancel this? I didn't know what to do without this. Is going to be really hard on this person or hard on me, depending on how we get on. And I thought, no, actually, this person has come from somewhere, and so I'm going to run this class for her. I'm going to honor her booking. I'm going to run it. It doesn't matter how much time it takes me to do it. So I ran the class, and she came in, and she was lovely. And as soon as she came in, she said, my husband looked at the brochure and he pointed to this class and he said, this is the class you're going to want to do. And then she said, we're staying in Booster House, which is just along the road for the Mucklero Hall, which is where the class is. And she said, and when we came last night for a run to find a hall, and when we saw the hall was so close, then he said, well, it must be fate that we're staying in Booster House. And I'm thinking, thank God I didn't cancel this class.
Yeah.
Actually, and I told her about, you could get, at that time you could buy odd bits of seconds of Fair Isle for Jamieson's, and she sent me a photo of her bed in Booster House just covered in yarn and tweed and bits of old gansies that she'd bought. And she's come back to Woolwich every single year, and 10 friends and family wear, and we're in pretty much daily messaging contact. So I thought that was just an example of how you have to do it. You have to kind of make the right decision and give somebody a good experience, and hopefully, and what did happen, I wasn't doing it. I wasn't trying to make her come back every year, but I was just really, really glad that I chose to go ahead with that.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that. That's amazing. I think, yeah, as you're saying, like with social media, everything's thrown out of proportion as far as what the likes mean and how we interpret that, and what lack of, quote unquote, lack of likes or lack of followers means, and how we interpret that, and then how that carries on into our whole world. And it's like, if when you were 12 years old, if you had 3 friends who really got you, that was wonderful. You were living a wonderful life.
And I think the thing with Woolwich particularly, well, not just Woolwich, but just generally as you get older, I think you just realise that there is an infinite number of folk that you could be friends with, that you could be really close friends, really good friends with. And the sad thing is that there is a limit to the number of folk you can be like, true close friends with, just because of your time and your circumstances. But at the same time, I always feel like after Wool Week, I feel like I've been on a holiday, because I've met folk from all over the world. I mean, one of my classes, there was 3 folk from Australia and 1 from Taiwan. And it was like, you're getting this glimpse into other worlds, and okay, it's magical, really. Although I've no left Shetland, and yet I've had this, the whole world has come to Wes.
Thank you so much, Helen. I really hope that you all enjoyed that. All of Helen's contact information is available in the show notes, including her email address, links to her Ravelry, links to her social media, her website, all of it. If any of her classes sound interesting, you are welcome to reach out to schedule a class of your own. She just needs a minimum of 4 people in order to run a class. So reach out to your fiber friends, maybe a local yarn shop, and see if Helen can come to you via the wonders of the internet. Also, I wanted to strongly recommend that you both follow Helen on Instagram or Facebook, because she is such an interesting person to follow, but also take some time to poke around on her website. You'll be able to see many of the things we spoke of in this episode, plus her gorgeous jewelry designs, which we only sort of talked about in passing in this interview. One knitting-related project that we both forgot while we were talking was another project Helen just recently completed called The Tree of Life Interrupted. The Tree of Life is a knitting pattern that's often used in lace or in Fair Isle yokes. In lace, it's knit in holes, and in Fair Isle, it's knit as lines of colored stitches. The shape ends up looking like a Christmas tree, wide at the bottom, tapering off at the top. For her Tree of Life Interrupted project, Helen knit 21 trees of life using copper wire. Those were then given to Cheryl Jameson at Glance and Glass, who encased them in glass. Helen also created a flag of the image of the tree that flew from the Lerwick Town Hall on the 29th of May this year to commemorate the lifting of the first lockdown in Scotland. She adds that the design symbolized life, death, community, and democracy, and the interruption COVID had caused. She's not written about the project yet, but if you follow her on Facebook or Instagram, you can go back and find her photos and thoughts from May. Also, if you hop by her website, you can get on her mailing list and find out when she posts about the project herself. Again, all the links are in the show notes. And thank you again, Helen. A few more things before I go. Wovember's almost coming to an end this year, but there are still a few more days left to hop over on Instagram and take part. Follow the hashtag Wovember2024 to learn from your fellow Wovemberists. You will find the posting prompts on my feed. Make your own posts for the rest of the month and use the hashtag I mentioned, and you'll be qualified to win one of the daily posting prizes. Also remember that as we head into the holiday shopping season, that over at Wovember.com, there is a marketplace full of wool producers and people making things out of wool and things that celebrate wool. It's a great way to find gifts for friends and family, and you can also do a little wish list shopping there. Find a few things you're interested in and send some hints to folks. Check it out over at lovewovember.com. Speaking of, I am hoping to do a shopping guide episode for the holidays that will serve as inspiration for folks to find gifts for their fiber-loving friends and family. If I can, I'll have that out very soon, like next week. Let's see how I do. In case I'm not back before December 1st, remember that the Woolly Winter Countdown will begin on December 1st over on the Purl Together YouTube channel. If you have your Shetland Hogmanay box, have it ready and we can open it together each morning of December. If you don't have one, come join us anyway. Jana and I have a good time each morning of December as we open our mystery yarn boxes through the month and chat. We just chat. We're good at talking with one another. I will hopefully be back here next week. I'll definitely be back December 1st on the Purl Together YouTube. And in the meantime, thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review the show in the app you use to download it. And I'd love it if you would share the episode with a friend. The show notes are where you will find links to the things mentioned in the show, so be sure to check those out. Find me on my social media accounts as I thought I knew how. The groups on various platforms are all called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit.